Damn, talking in front of a camera is different than I expected it to feel. I feel so much more aware of what I'm saying. So yeah,
It's with such a pain to be alone and lonely in the rain. And
good evening. It's not evening for me. Today I'll be talking about a game I really like. The Beginner's Guide, Davey Reedon. So I had a few different games that I could have made this video about, including Terraria, Dark Souls 3, Escape from Tarkov, XCOM 2, Half-Life 2, Faster Than Light, Fallout New Vegas, and The Beginner's Guide, which is what I decided to do. So yeah, those 7 games I didn't make this video on, I may circle back later and make another video on one of them, because I could make a full video about any one of them. They're all really good. I like them all a lot. But I chose The Beginner's Guide as the focus of this video because it's so unique, and relative to the other games I listed, you, the viewer, are less likely to know about it or have played it. So, if you remember a few years ago, or more than years ago, there was this mod for Half-Life 2 called The Stanley Parable. It was a branching story adventure game made by Davey Reedon, and I was really captivated by the idea of The Stanley Parable, and I think I watched like every ending and path on YouTube in like what would have been, when that game came out, yeah, whatever. So anyway, years later, The Stanley Parable was released as a standalone game on Steam. It was like its own whole thing, like, being sold. It was cool. When it was on sale, bought it, played through the whole thing, really liked it. This isn't a review of The Stanley Parable, but I really enjoyed it. I'd already seen a portion of the content because I watched most of it on YouTube from like the Half-Life 2 mod, and a lot of the things that were in the Half-Life 2 mod carried over to the standalone, but I still really liked the game anyway. There was something different about playing it myself that like watching YouTubers didn't really get me. Like, it was a very personal experience, and it was just a lot better to like play it rather than just watch it. It's like a lot of people think that they're like, it's pretty much the same thing, right? Like just being walked through this corridor basically versus watching someone else being walked through this corridor. But it is quite surprising quite how different it feels when it's like you doing it. Yeah. Anyway, so I quite fondly remember The Stanley Parable. The reason I'm bringing up Stanley is because Reedon, the fellow who made The Stanley Parable, went on to make the game I'm making this video about, The Beginner's Guide. As someone who's played both games, I think it's fairly reasonable to call The Beginner's Guide a spiritual successor to Stanley, as both are first-person, story-heavy adventure games with a very similar tone and, I guess, vibe. The Beginner's Guide doesn't have a branching story though, it's linear, and has a less comedic tone. The Stanley Parable feels like being a kid and being told a funny story by your uncle, but The Beginner's Guide feels like being at a friend's house and them telling you a very personal story. Reedon himself does the voice acting for the narrator, who is a fictional version of himself. The game also has no achievements, which I consider notable. I think Reedon doesn't want you to think about this game as a trial or an accomplishment to complete. You're not supposed to peek into every corner to find secrets. There's no intentional challenge. You're simply supposed to experience the story, which I think is cool because it demonstrates how The Beginner's Guide sort of breaks video game storytelling conventions and does things in its own way. Although this is kind of reading too deeply into a minor thing. I'm going to bisect this next part of the video. First, I will tell you generally and vaguely what happens in The Beginner's Guide, though words cannot convey what this game is, at least emotionally, to me. And then second, I'm going to tell you how this... Oh, I made an error in the script. And then second, I'm going to tell you how the beginner's guide conveys its story, its method, more specifically than just video game interactive medium, because the way it tells the story is genius, but also really simple, and it mirrors the way you may learn a story from a friend in real life or someone you know. The beginner's guide guides you through a series of games and levels that the narrator informs you were created by a guy named Coda. These games that you guided through, they have this sort of charm, like custom maps on community-hosted game servers. They're clearly not professionally made, but they're not like throwaway garbage work either. Someone really like worked on these levels and wanted them to be good or to serve a purpose. There's something that's almost like ethereal about walking through the levels and like just listening to the narrator providing you with the context for them. Like you sort of feel like you're getting to view a collection of paintings that an artist didn't let anyone but themselves see. It's like you're getting like almost like a little private window into a person's soul, I guess. If you can like, yeah. Alright, awesome. There were certain ways in which I was set up to like this game before I even knew about it. Many of the environments remind me strongly of community-made Garry's Mod maps, which hold a place in my heart and will always influence how I see games. The beginner's guide so confidently embraces and presents levels and architecture with rough edges that was clearly made by a few people or a single person with middling experience. After a while, once you've seen some little games Coda made by himself, you get elaboration from the narrator on his relationship to Coda, how they met, things that happened between them as friends, the narrator's fascination with Coda's games and enigmatic personality, and so on. Of course, it's not straightforward, and a strong theme is that of the unreliable narrator, with the narrator in the beginner's guide giving you information when he's ready to, and when it's convenient for him to do so, rather than at a point where it would make sense for him to tell you so that you can understand the story. So, I said earlier that the beginner's guide feels like being at a friend's house, and like being told a personal story, and I think this is the most apt way to concisely describe how the game made me feel. The narrator shows you a bunch of levels that Coda made and tells you about them and how Coda showed him what you're playing now. And he talks about the nature of games and the nature of artists and a bunch of tangential crap, or a bunch of tangential stuff. For example, a topic that's covered by the narrator several times is whether or when something like a piece of art is considered finished, or if it's ever finished. There are also a couple of moments that become tongue-in-cheek on second playthrough, like the narrator deciding to teleport you past a puzzle section that he deems boring and extraneous. On a side note, I replayed the game when I was writing this review, and the first time I played the game was in... October of 2017, and I still remember all of it like I played it just a couple of months ago, finding certain statements made by the narrator to be almost cheeky on replaying the game. I think the game really stuck with me and made quite an impression on me personally. Anyway, back to the review. Following on from being teleported past the section the narrator doesn't...
It's slightly zoomed in. How do I zoom back out? There we go.
So, following on from being teleported past the section the narrator doesn't think you need to experience, the end of one of the early levels is modified by the narrator, which is important moving forwards and is something that comes back again and again throughout the story. I also mentioned earlier that the narrator in the beginner's guide is an unreliable narrator and will not always tell you 100% the truth about him and Coda. This is important because having the narrator tell you white lies like this that you discover the truth about later actually gives you more information than if he just told you the story straight, because through the things he omits and modifies you can start to feel the real shape of his relationship with Coda, because the things he isn't entirely truthful and forthcoming about are the things that he's sensitive about. It's like how if a friend tells you a story about themselves in real life, they'll first tell you the outline of the story that's convenient for them, and then they'll gradually, gently reveal the details that are painful or uncomfortable to them. The reason that the narrator's lies are important to the emotion of the story is the fact that he's lying tells you so much about how he feels and the emotional effect that his relationship with Coda had on him. The Beginner's Guide is an experience that a game had never given me before. There are a lot of really cool narratives in games, like the stories of the Bioshock games, and the geopolitics of Fallout New Vegas, and the little people struggling beneath the dueling colossi of Bear and Bull. Playing The Beginner's Guide made me really feel like I had been told a story in a completely new way. I had never experienced a story like this before, all the way that it was told to me. And if you're intrigued by what I've said about new ways to tell a story, or if you enjoyed the Stanley Parable, I recommend trying the game. Toby, oh, you meant that. I make YouTube videos almost entirely for myself because I like them and I enjoy making them, and I don't care if nobody else in the world watches them. They're for me and I love them. The Beginner's Guide resonated so much stronger with me on replaying it now as someone who has made odd and esoteric and inaccessible pieces of my own work, such as a 70-minute video about space engineers. The Beginner's Guide explores someone who put lots of work into the weird things they made with little to no appeal to anyone but themselves. Seemingly just doing it for the sake of doing the work. And it actually made me feel emotional by portraying art the way that it did. My experience with human connections to other people has told me that some people will not give you full documentation on who they are and what they do. Some people are reclusive and are interested in esoteric things, and oftentimes will not tell you about them. The Beginner's Guide explores the idea of getting to know a person, not just the things they say to you. It comments on quite how much content is inside of a person and their head, and how you are almost certainly not going to experience all of it, no matter how much you like that person. The Beginner's Guide features a critic/fan of a person's work who is frustrated with the direction the creator is taking. The Beginner's Guide, in my view, is saying that you should do whatever you want with your work. There's no good reason for me not to make another 70-minute video that nobody will watch but me. The work is for me. I really didn't expect to have such a personal response to The Beginner's Guide on replaying it 3 years later, but I'm glad that I got to play it again as a discussion on creating works and the relationship between a creator and his audience.
Time tested, I could never trust my methods. Always
And
undermine
now
my
I'll edit the video.
on the outside, looking quiet, my temper. On the inside,
That's a wrap on filming for the Beginner's Guide review. All the filming has been finished in one day. I immediately dropped my script. Alright. Does my hair look okay? Do we need to get the makeup people back in?
Yeah, the makeup people are gonna come back in.
Okay.
Sam!
Alright, so. How did you hear us?
Impressive, Sam. Nothing.
I'll make the video like 8 gigabytes long.
8 gigabytes long.
Gigabytes are long.
Okay, I'll do the video now. Calling on for being cold-hearted. I also mentioned earlier that the narrator in The Beginner's Guide is an unrelated. No! I also mentioned earlier that the narrator. Oh, you meant that.
Dear God.
Ah!
Now my gameplay video.
Remember when we were driving and you just put your hand on my handbrake?
Yeah. What is this? Relatively. How many gigabyte long?